Ushers, come forward if you would, please. And we'll share in our offering together this morning, and thank you for giving and being a part of our church family. A couple of things for you. Sarah mentioned baptism coming up. I just want to encourage you. I know it's not until May, but now is the time to have those meetings. We're going to have a baptismal service on a Sunday morning. If you've never been to one of our baptismal services, it is an exciting time in our church, and we would love to have many of you take that next step. If you haven't done it, oftentimes there's fears and just some lack of understanding of what it all means. Take that next step. Meet with one of our leadership team. They'll talk you through what it means to be baptized and why. And take that next step in your following of God. So if you haven't done that, plan on that next one coming up in May. Love to have you be a part of that. Next week, we're going to start a new series. In fact, I was going to start it today, and I just felt God leading me a different direction. But I want to give you a little heads up. You know, a lot of us are in the search for happiness in our life, and I'm just saying, listen, forget the happiness. Let's run right for the joy. And we're going to start a 7 to 9 week series from Philippians talking about joy, unstoppable, unsinkable joy. I think every one of us would love to have that in our lives. And we're going to take a look at Philippians and see how to have that joy, and you're going to find that joy is going to be coming from different places than you might expect. And so we're going to start that next week. We'll run up to Easter, then pause, and then come back, and then pick that up again after Easter. So hopefully you'll be a part of that. I'd love to have you join us for that series and really learn about what it means to have joy in our lives, this real joy, not manufactured stuff, but the real joy. So join us for that. Next week, just so you know, we had a great response last week, so thank you. As we're getting ready for Easter, Easter is now 7 weeks out. We're getting our pre-Easter promo stuff ready, and we're running with a theme that says, I found, and then finish the statement. I found what when I came to Jesus? When I found Jesus, I found what? I found peace. I found whatever. We started that last week. I was gone last week, but heard a number of the stories, and just incredible stories. So thank you for doing that. But we also realized that we did that last week, right at the very beginning of school break, and so a lot of people gone. So we want to do it again next week as well. So if you might consider giving us a little time, we'll give you the right location next week. We're not sure what room it'll be in. But give us a little time where you'd be able to sit down for a few moments and share a little bit of your story, how you came to Christ, and when you came to Jesus, you found what? And let us do a little interview with you, take some pictures, some video, so that we can plaster your face all over the nation on internet, and so you'd be a hit across the world. We won't do anything like that, but we would like to use some of your stories, our stories, as we get ready for Easter. So be thinking about that this week. And oftentimes people think, I don't have much to say by story-wise. You have more than you think. And so give us a moment of your time next week. And next week we'll announce the place and time of all of that. So participate with us if you would. This morning, as I said, I was going to start the series on joy, but I decided to go a different direction. I'm going to preach a sermon this morning that I have preached before. In fact, I've preached it in its closest form to what I'll preach this morning. I preached it about 15 years ago, but I've preached it numbers of times since then. Now, not here. I preached it about 15 years ago here. And then 12 years ago, I was actually asked to preach at our national convention that happens in every 2 years, this year happening in Florida. And in fact, when I preached it 12 years ago, it was in that setting. And after preaching there, I was asked for a number of districts and churches to come and preach at different campuses that same message. And the reason for that, I believe, is that if there is a life sermon, a lot of pastors will have like their life sermon, the kind of message or sermon that resonates from within. This would be mine. If there's a theme, if there's a thought process, if there's a topic, if there's an idea that resonates deep inside of me, this is it. If there's a passage, if there's a thought, if there's a mission that moves me to action, this is the one. And I felt like, we're 7 to 8 weeks out of Easter, but oftentimes I will every year do something along the idea of staying on mission. And I want to preach this message this morning that I preached some years ago. Now, you might remember a story or two from it, because that's kind of what happens with sermons, right? You may not remember the content, but you'll go, hey, I remember that story. So maybe the story might trigger some of the content along the way. But more than that, I hope that you'll hear the heart of the message, for it's a message for our church, and it's a message for us. Let me give you some context as we begin again this morning to get us on the same page. I want to remind you that we're living in a culture today in which Christendom is dead. We live in a culture today where Christendom is dead. Now, I did not say Christianity is dead, but some of you heard that. Some of you in your framework, you heard me just say Christianity is dead, and that is not true. Christianity is not dead. Christianity is alive and well. The gospel of Jesus Christ is still changing lives today, alive and well. But Christendom is not. Christendom in our culture is dead. Now, for clarity, what does Christendom mean? It's a fairly long definition, but here you go. Christendom is a place or a culture where either the majority of people are Christians or where that culture is influenced or determined by a Christian value system. So Christendom, again, it's a place, it's a culture in which the majority of those people are either Christians or quote-unquote God-fearing, or it's a culture or a society that has been influenced, its value structure is directly influenced by Christianity. That's Christendom. And again, I want you to remember something that I've said before. The United States of America has never been a Christian country. I continue to hear people who will lament the changing world and say, our country is no longer a Christian country. Our country was never a Christian country, ever in its history. Quite honestly, it's impossible if you think about it. A person can make a decision to follow Christ, and they can be a Christian. A group of people can't be Christian. A person can be a Christian, can be a follower of Christ. A family can't be a Christian family just by title. Now, if you've got 5 family members and they're all Christians, they're all followers of Christ, you could say, well, that's a Christian family. But it's not a Christian family just because one is or because someone decrees it to be a Christian family. A culture can't be a Christian culture, if you will. A rock can't be a Christian rock. The only living thing that can be a Christian is a person who makes a decision to follow Christ. And so please know that you don't have a Christian country. Now, if you would say that our country used to have a value system that was very much built upon biblical principle or Christian values, and that's changed, that would be an acceptable statement. But to say, well, we used to be a Christian country, that would not be accurate. I would also suggest to you that whenever a country, just looking historically, whenever some country declares itself to be a Christian country, it all goes south. Everything goes south when some dictator says, you know what, we're going to be a Christian country. All through history, it all goes wrong. If you want to look at what are the last remaining country in the world that declares itself to be a Christian country, it would be Britain, England, where the queen or the king, whoever might be in office at that point in time, is the head of the church, and the head of the church is the head of the state. And if you look at it, you would find that Christendom died out long ago in England. And now it's kind of having that same issue here where Christendom is dying out. Now, please know the culture we live in, I think you'd agree with this, is becoming more and more and more secular. The culture we're living in today is moving further and further and further and further away from Christian values. Now, I want you to hear this next statement as well. That is not the fault of the church. I'm so tired hearing some Christians talk about this changing culture and blaming that laying it at the feet of the church. The church has a changed job. Now, in one sense, there could be some truth to that. I'll come back to that. But it's not the fault of the church. A culture which continues to work and to become more and more secular is the result of the human, broken, failed heart. It's not the fault of the church. It's the fact that we all like to be in our own kingdom. One of the greatest issues we have, I've shared this with you before, is that we live in a democracy. And a democracy says everybody gets together and the group decides what's right and what's good. And whenever the group gets together and decide what's right and what's good, it's never good. It never goes in the right direction. So the church didn't necessarily create this issue, but the church does have to ask a question, and that is this: how do we operate then in this culture? If the church, if Christianity is for today, if the gospel of Jesus Christ is still changing lives, then what does the church need to be? What does the church need to look like? And by church, I'm referring to who? Us. Because we make up the church. So what is it that the church is supposed to be? How are we going to navigate in this culture? If Jesus Christ still makes a difference, then how do we represent Christ in such a way as to make a difference in our world today? Well, I'll give you 2 things. 2 points is all of the sermon. But don't get too excited. I can take 2 points and I can make it into 3 hours if I need to. So just don't get too excited. But I'll give you 2 things. 2 things that the church needs to be. 2 things the church has to grab a hold of if we're going to be the kind of church that can speak into this culture. The first thing is the church needs to be a church committed to Jesus Christ. If we're going to change the culture, if we're going to have any say into the culture around us, then we need to be a church that's absolutely committed to Jesus Christ. And by church, I'm talking about us. We need to be Christians who are committed to Jesus Christ, not with lip service. See, an awful lot of us, it's too easy to say, I am totally committed to Jesus. Show me. Prove it. And I say that not pointing my finger at you. I'm saying that we can't just say it by lip service. We can't just say it by talking about it. We're not going to get there by thinking about it. But by my life, by my actions, by my giving, by my thinking, by my lifestyle, I live out a life absolutely committed to Jesus Christ. Now, friends, this first one is so critical. You know why, right? Because you will do things for Jesus that you will never do for the church. You will go places for Jesus. You're never going to go for your ministry or the place where you serve. You will give things, you will do things, you will say things, you will live out a certain lifestyle for Jesus Christ that you'll never do for me. You see, your commitment to Jesus Christ is far more important than your commitment to this church or your commitment to me as the pastor. You'll do things, you'll give things, you'll go places for Jesus Christ you'll never do for anyone else. Church or pastor included. Your commitment to Jesus Christ is the most important thing. And as a church together, we have to be committed to Jesus Christ. Now, for some of you who like the deeper things of the truth of the Scriptures, you'll say, well, Scott, that's pretty elementary. It is pretty elementary. But I would challenge you that this elementary truth is one of the deepest truths you're ever going to find. Because here's the problem. For my life and for yours, but I'll just speak to myself for just a moment. Here's the problem with this elementary truth of being completely committed to Jesus Christ. There are a lot of days where that commitment to Jesus gets real blurry in my life. How about yours? Let me tell you why it gets blurry. It gets blurry because I'm incredibly committed, completely committed to Scott. See, this commitment to Jesus gets blurry because I'm incredibly committed to me. You're committed to you. Now, on top of me being incredibly committed to me, I've got a family that wants me totally committed to them. I have a church family, not all, but I have some church members that want me completely committed to them. I got a church budget that screams for me to be committed to it. I got a 30-year-old house that every day shouts my name. Please be committed to me. Please be committed to me. I got a sliding glass door that screams, commit to me, because it has to get fixed. It has to get done. Don't you have those same things in your life? The same issues that are calling for you? So my statement is, it gets a little blurry, doesn't it? This elementary truth of being ultimately committed to Jesus gets really blurry with all the other things that call for my commitment. You see, that's the point Jesus was trying to make in Luke chapter 14. Luke chapter 14, verse 25, here's what he says. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father or mother and wife or children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Those are pretty firm words. And for most of us, we look at that and say, oh, who can follow Jesus then? So he's not really meaning to hate all of these people, but in 2 simple verses, he tells us and gives us the picture of why it's so hard to be ultimately committed to Christ. 2 things. Number 1, people make it hard. Relationships make it hard. That's why he said, listen, you got to put the people behind you if you're going to follow me, because people are always going to blur the lines. They're going to blur the way. Relationships cause problems. That's the first thing he says. Second thing he says, agendas. People and agendas will always make it blurry in your commitment to follow Christ. That's why the agenda piece, he says, pick up your cross and follow me. I'll give you one of my little pet peeves. And I know people don't mean it, but I'll hear Christians oftentimes, some little thing in life goes on. I had a family member that I would give a hard time because their jokes were horrible. And they'd say, well, my humor might be bad, but you're stuck with me. I guess we all have our crosses to bear. And I kind of just cringe with that. Because the idea of a cross to bear, Jesus Christ picked up his cross to go to the place of death for us. When he talked about having your cross to bear, picking it up bear, he's talking about laying down your agenda and taking on the agenda of Christ. And so in those two verses, he pretty accurately said, listen, here's what makes it blurry. People make it blurry. Agendas make it blurry. And so he comes back around to say, so priority number one is me. Commitment to Jesus Christ first. A church full of people committed to Jesus Christ. That's the first thing. Second thing, the second kind of church we are to be is we need to be a church committed to people. We need to be a church committed to Christ, and we need to be a church committed to people. Well, what people? Specifically, people who are outside of the church, not people who are inside of the church. Doesn't mean we abandon each other. But if we look at the model of Jesus, we're going to see in just a moment, he calls us to be a church, to be people who are committed to the unchurched people, committed to those people who are spiritually unresolved, who don't even believe in God, who even don't believe in the Bible. They have no idea how good life can be. We are to be committed to them. But again, thinking about it doesn't get it done. Saying, yeah, that's true. I'm really committed to the unchurched people. Saying it is not the same as getting it done. There's a key ingredient that a church must possess if we're going to make a difference in this culture in which we live. And by church, I say to you again, there's a key ingredient that I must possess, that we must possess. There's a missing piece that quite honestly is missing in too many churches and in too many Christians' lives. In fact, I come back to it in my life over and over again because it's so easy for this piece to slip out of focus for me. I think it's this missing piece is what Jesus is trying to communicate to us in Luke chapter 15. And here's how the story begins in Luke 15, verse 1. Now, the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Let's just start there for just a moment. You've got two groups of people. You have the people who are the furthest away from God in perspective. They're the tax collectors and the sinners. And then you have what we'll call the church people. These are the religious people, the religious teachers, and those that have been in the church for a long time. I know we're talking about synagogue here, but for the sake of our vernacular here, we'll talk about the church and the unchurched. Now, what's interesting about this, it tells us in the story that the most unchurched people, the tax collectors and the sinners, actually were drawn to Jesus. They gathered around him. That should strike you as odd. In our culture today, someone who is seen as being the holiest person who's ever lived would not be attracting a crowd today in our thought process. We think in our thought process, in our culture today, man, they don't want to be anything with anyone that has a moral compass. Here's the holiest man who ever lived, the cleanest, if you will, and the dirtiest people all gathered around him and wanted to be near him. That should make you wonder why. Because it doesn't click. In our culture, it doesn't click. Here's a guy that professes truth, that there's an absolute truth, and there's only one way, and these people all gather around him. Why would they be drawn to Jesus? Think about that. Why would they be drawn to Jesus? Now, we don't have a set answer. I'm only going to give you my best shot. But I think it goes like this. I think it's because that not only did Jesus genuinely love them, but he also genuinely loved to be with them. Not only did he love them, but he actually loved being with them. He actually treated them with dignity and without judgment. He was comfortable with them as they were without them having to change or without him having to change them. He didn't just say, "Oh, I love these people that hate me." He actually loved being with these people who didn't even know him. You see, a lot of Christians who would talk about, "Oh, I have a real passion for the people who don't know Jesus." Do you love being with those people? You see, here's the difference. Not only did Jesus say, "Well, I love them," but Jesus loved living with them. He loved being with them. Now, did you notice that while he's hanging out with all the unchurched people, did you notice in the story what the church people were doing? The word that's used there is they muttered to themselves. It's a great word. Some of us are real mutterers, aren't we? When the day's not going well, you can just use the word, he's over in the kitchen muttering to himself. They're muttering to one another. And whenever you mutter, it's never a good thing. And in the story, they're muttering. And they're muttering. Now listen to this. You see, they're upset because Jesus is spending time with the unchurched people as instead of with them, the church people. You see, they want Jesus for themselves. They want Jesus to be whispering sweet spiritual nothings in their ears, and he can't do that if he's not with them. Now, I want you to think about this for just a moment. What exactly is Jesus being accused of by them? I'll give you a simple definition. Their complaint, if you read the text, their complaint is that Jesus is spending too much time and too much energy with unchurched people. That's the church people's complaint. That he's not focused on them. He's not teaching into their lives. He's not doing the things that they want done. Now think about this. So what's Jesus guilty of? Jesus is guilty of spending time with people. He's guilty of spending time with people who have more questions than they have answers, who don't know what to believe, who are confused and have no real hope. In fact, basically, if you sum it all up, he's being accused of spending time with the people who actually need him most. That's what he's being accused of. Here's a statement no good church person's going to like. I preached this message to about 5,000 pastors and spiritual leaders at a conference, and I made this statement to them, and you could see the look on their faces because, for many of them, they didn't like the statement, but you have to accept the statement because the way I'm going to put it, you really can't do anything with it. There you go. Here it is. Jesus has always shown preferential treatment for people outside of the church. Jesus has always shown preferential favoritism, if you will, for those outside of the church, not those inside of the church. Meaning this, if there's a concert and there's the best seat in the house, he'd be giving it to somebody else, not to us. And we kind of go like, but wait a minute, I give my money. I've paid for this row over and over and over and over again, and man, I'm serving regularly. And Jesus says, yeah, thanks for serving. I'm going to need hundreds of you to serve while we open the doors for those who aren't serving to come. He's always shown preferential treatment for those outside of the church. So these church people who are muttering to themselves aren't getting what Jesus is trying to convey to them, and so he tells them 3 stories that help get their focus. Here's the first of those stories in Luke chapter 15, begins in verse 3. So Jesus told them this parable. He says, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and his neighbors together and he says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. So he tells them story number 1. Now please know, Jesus is just masterful as to how he tells a story and gets the point across to the people who need to who need to get the point. He is just absolutely masterful. You see what he did there? He started like this. He said, suppose you have 100 sheep and you lose one. Instead of saying, let me tell you a story. So let's say I have 100 sheep and I lose one. You say, well, what's the difference? A huge difference. Because he says, suppose you have 100 sheep. Because here's the deal. You care about what's yours, not what's mine. If I stand up and tell you this week, listen, I lost my car keys this week, you'd go, really? How long did you lose them? Did you ever find them? That must have been tough. But if I tell you, hey, thanks for letting me borrow your car this week, and by the way, I lost your car keys. Now you care. Right? Now you're engaged with me because I actually lost your car keys. He's incredible when he says, so you have 100 sheep and you lose one. And then he does this next thing, which is incredible. He actually knows the answer that they were thinking in their mind, so he says it for them. So if you lose one, you will go out and you will search for that lost sheep until you find it. And when you find it, you're going to call everybody to celebrate with you because you found the sheep, right? And of course, in their minds, they're going, that's right. Why? Because they live in a sheep culture, and sheep are valuable. So when he says that, they all go, yeah, that's right. And then he does this to them, again, masterful. In verse 7, and then he says, I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who don't need to repent. And the people are thinking, hey, I thought we were talking about sheep. And Jesus says, you were, but the whole time I've been talking about you. So they're beginning to get it. And then he tells another story. I won't read that one, but he tells another story who's almost identical to the first. But he says, so let's say there's a woman who's got 10 silver coins and she loses one. She goes through the whole process again. She loses one, she searches all over until she finds it, and she comes back, she celebrates, she calls her friends, hey, I found that missing silver coin. Now, admittedly, a silver coin isn't as worth much as a gold coin, but in that economy, it's still very, very worth looking for, a silver coin. And when she finds it, she rejoices. Why? Because they live in a money culture. They live in a culture where sheep are important, and we all live in a culture where money is important. It's valuable. And so he tells them that story, and they get it. Now, please understand that those two stories Jesus tells masterfully as a setup for the third story. The third story is the knockout punch, if you will. The first two set them up. And so he begins this story a little differently, but he does so with a reason. Here's how the third story begins. Jesus continued in verse 11. There was a man who had 2 sons. He says it seamlessly. Lost sheep, lost coin. Now there's a man who had 2 sons. Now understand why he would have done this. And again, it's an incredible thing. What do you do when you're losing a debate with someone? What do you do when you're losing a debate? You know what you do, right? You begin to kind of play the thing down. Whatever you're talking about, you play it down, or you deflect. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're a Red Sox fan. When the Red Sox are winning, baseball's everything to you. I know this. I talk to you often. When the Red Sox are winning, baseball is everything to you. When the Red Sox are losing, what do? Oh, it's just a game. No big deal. No, they're just grooming for next year, right? And Yankee fans do the same thing, right? We deflect it away. Now, these religious leaders in the story, man, they're not stupid. In fact, they've been sucker punched twice now. Because he tells the sheep story, and you go look, and they go, yeah. So in your mind, what are you thinking? Man, he got me with the sheep. He got me with the coin. So now they're setting up, because now they're thinking, man, had I known this was coming when he said, so you lose a sheep, what do? You go, hey, I got 99 more. If they would have seen it coming, they would have said, so you lose a coin, you have 10, you lose one, what do? They would have gone, I forget about it because I got 9 more. So what's he do? A father has 2 sons. What are you going to do? Say, well, I got 1 more. I'm not going to go look for him. Right? It's incredibly masterful, because all of a sudden they can't discount the story. You see, that's what we do. Whenever God's Word, whenever God through His Holy Spirit is pushing in on our lives, we figure out a way to diffuse the story. So they're getting their plan in place and how I can get out of this thing. And then he says, a man has 2 sons. It's like, oh, man. I got to listen. I can't get out of this because I can't write this story off. And then he tells the story of 2 sons. Many of you know the story, the prodigal son. The father has 2 sons. The younger son comes to his dad and says, I want my inheritance now, which, just so you know, is something that could happen in that culture. It was unheard of like today. And today, if somebody comes and gives me inheritance now, we would say, forget that. When I die, you'll get it, if you get it now. Back then, it was an acceptable thing, but he comes with an attitude and says, I want my inheritance right now. He takes it, he leaves. You know the story. He goes, he squanders it all away. He wastes it on one horrible, horrible lifestyle to the place where he has nothing left. He doesn't even have enough food to eat. And he thinks to himself, I'm starving here. I'm living in squalor. I'm just going to go back to my dad. And when I go back to my dad, I'm going to say to him, I don't deserve to be a son. I'm not back here to be your son. Please know, I've squandered it all. I am so sorry. Just let me be one of your hired hands because they eat better than I'm eating right now. He gets his story down. He goes back to his father. You know the story, right? He can't even get home because apparently this father has been watching every day, watching the road, and sees the son coming down the road, and he runs out to meet the son. And I can only imagine this meeting where he runs out to meet his dirty son who's got nothing. I can imagine the son trying to get his story out. Dad, I just want to say, shh. No, Dad, I have to say this. No, quiet. I have to say, I don't even deserve to be your... Stop it. You're home. My son is home. And then he says, come on, I'm going to get you a bath. I'm going to get you new clothes, a whole new wardrobe. I'm going to put jewelry back on your fingers because it's all gone. You got rid of everything. My son is home. I'm going to kill the fattened calf. We're going to celebrate. My son is back. He doesn't even get to finish the story. And the father says, my son is home. So welcome back. Now, the point to start here in this story is that would not be the response of many of us in the story to the son who came home after squandering all the money he gave him. Let's be real honest with ourselves. There are many of us that would say, so you're back and you're broke, huh? So you're back and you're broke. And by the way, where's all the money that I gave you? Some of you would say, well, your mother told me you'd come back one day. Now, that seemed a little harsh. So let me put it in a little different way that most of us would say. And it would go like this. Well, you're back. Well, you need to know that we're glad to have you back, but there's going to be rules in place now. That from this point forward, we're gonna sign a contract, and we're gonna lay it right out there. Not from this dad. No. Not from this dad. Man, this dad kills a cow. This guy throws a party. He brings in musicians. He puts clothes and jewelry on the guy. Man, my son has come home. But don't forget there are two sons. The second son, the older son, never left. Stayed there and worked every day. Never said to dad, I want what I have coming to me. He stayed there. He worked faithfully every day, stayed at home. And then he comes home from work one day. And here's the verse in 25. Meanwhile, the older son, who never left home, was out in the field working. And when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come home, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. Big brother comes home from work. He smells the roast beef. He hears the music. He's out there going, man, that smells good. And hey, what's going on? Oh, your brother's home. And you can see that the smell got bitter in his nose and his foot began to kick the dirt instead of tapping with the music. And he says, what? He goes, oh, your brother's home. And your father is celebrating. You should go in. And he goes, no. And according to the text, he gets bitter and he gets angry. The father comes out and pleads with him and says, son, you got to come in. Your brother's home. Here's his response to his father in verse 29. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him? My son, the father, said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. Now make sure you get this. The oldest son has been living in the father's wealth. And in fact, not just living in it, enjoying it. He has been enjoying the presence of his father. He's been enjoying all of the benefits of the father. In fact, he has shared and enjoyed all of the wealth and all of the resources of the father this whole time. But there's one thing he didn't share. If you remember 15 years ago, you might remember what it is he didn't share. He shared the father's presence. He shared the father's house. He shared the father's food. He shared the father's abundance. He shared the father's wealth. He shared the father's resources. But there's one missing piece he didn't share. He never shared the father's heart. He never shared the heart of the Father. Now, in a very profound yet unspoken way, Jesus says to you and he says to me, you are one of two sons. And immediately we go, wait a minute. What do you mean? One of two sons? Now it's interesting, whenever we read a parable in the story, in the scriptures, most of us and most people like to know who we are in the story. So who are we in the story? So let's just picture for a moment. Jesus tells the story, and immediately we go, okay. So who am I in the story? So he goes, okay, well, here's the first son, rebellious, arrogant, runs off, squanders all that he has in a horrible lifestyle. And we go, okay, I don't want to be that one in the story. So who else could I be? And Jesus says, okay, well, second son is hard-hearted, selfish, judgmental, bitter, and also arrogant. And then we go, is there a daughter in the story? Does the father have a daughter? Is there some other sibling I could be? Is anyone else I can be? And the truth of it is, friends, nope, there's two sons, one or the other. When I look at this, I think, wait a minute. So this story is about us? Please remember that Jesus is telling this story to who? A whole bunch of churched people. He's telling this to the people who were the most learned in Scripture. These were the deep biblical thinkers. These are the ones that had the Bible studies down pat. These are the ones that understood the church. He's saying it to them. And then I think, wait a minute. Could all of us good Christians actually be the older brother who had lost the heart of the father? And the answer to that is yes. Now listen very, very closely. The moment that you or I don't see unchurched, unbelieving people with the same passion and action of the Father, we have become the older brother. And notice I said passion and action, because see, passion always gives way to action. You see, the way that many of us have escaped, myself included for years, have escaped the truth of this passage is I can say, oh no, I love them. And Jesus not only loved them, but he loved actually being with them. You see, passion always moves to action. And when my passion for quote unquote the unchurched people doesn't reflect my action, then I have lost the heart of the Father. Truth is, friends, if you look at the statistics of churches, including ours, you'd find that there's a lot of people who are enjoying the presence of the Father, enjoying the benefits of the Father, but not a lot of people who are sharing the heart of the Father in action. Some of you might recall this particular story. It was life-changing for us. Years ago when our children were young, and Adam was just a little boy, our youngest son, our youngest child, Adam, we were vacationing in Disney World. Happiest place on earth. My parents retired not too far from Disney, so we could go visit them in the wintertime and make trips to Disney without the cost of having to stay there and all that. So we made many trips. We were at Disney, jam-packed day. I don't know if it was school break time. It must have been, but I mean, just jam-packed. And we went into one of the stores shopping, just thousands of people. And Diane had one of the girls with her. I had one girl with me. She's in the store. I'm out of the store, sitting on a bench. I thought Adam was with her. She thought Adam was with me. So for 30 minutes to 45 minutes, we don't have Adam. And we don't know it. Until she walks out having shopped, and she says, hey, I'm ready to go. And then she says to me, where's Adam? And I go, well, he's with you. And she said, no, he's with you. I can't even barely tell the story. Years later, and my son Adam's in the church, so we know he's made it. But I can't barely tell the story because I remember the panic that came over me. My son was lost. My little boy was lost. And first of all, I would say to you, all time stood still. Everything just froze. Nothing else mattered. I began screaming his name. Adam! Adam! Screaming his name. And at that moment, I didn't care if I annoyed you or not. I didn't care. I didn't care who you were. If you were standing next to me, I asked you to help me find my son. I'd say, please help me. I'm shouting Adam's name. I don't believe for a moment that God purposely lost our son for me to learn this lesson, but I know that God used that moment of losing my son for me to learn this lesson. In that moment, friends, I got to look at the Father's heart for his children outside of the church that I'd never had before, that has never left me. I got a picture of the Father's heart. I walked away from that moment. I said, Lord, as long as I live and pastor a church, I'm going to lead the church to be on mission with the Father's heart because it changed me. Now, we found our son. He was hiding in one of those circular clothes racks right in the dead center. So we beat him. No, we didn't. Please don't send me an email. I know we didn't. We don't. You shouldn't. But we did. What you do? You say, "Oh, we miss you so much. What's wrong with you?" You know what we parents do. We're so sad, and then we grab them. We really let them have it. That day, I got to look at the Father's heart. You see, in my theology up to that point, I never had room in my theology for a frantic father. Because you see, God's never frantic. So not in the same definition of frantic that we would use, but I got a picture for the Father's heart. You see, friends, If the church is going to be relevant in the culture in which we live in today, then it has to be committed to Jesus Christ, and it has to be committed to people. And that commitment to people will not happen without the Father's heart. To have the Father's heart to the point where I'm willing to change, where I am willing to change how I live, where I'm willing to change how I think, where I'm willing to change who I hang out with, where I'm willing to change how I do church, when I'm willing to change from the judgmentalism that I practice on so many people to take hold of the love of Christ. If you want a rallying cry for the Church of Jesus Christ, this is it. Stay on mission with the heart of the Father. Now let me wrap up. What would happen if churches, but let's talk about us, what would happen in our church today if everyone who said, I am a follower of Jesus Christ, actually started living out the Father's heart for the world around us? I'll tell you 3 things that would happen. First is this: they will come. You know, the field of dreams, build it and they will come. Live it, they will come. Live it and they will come. People who you'd never think would ever step foot inside of a church will walk in, and they're not even sure why, when the church begins to live out the heart of Christ. You see, friends, if you could just stop and see for just a moment, the people in the culture around us, they aren't nearly as turned off to God as much as they are turned off to church. Churches that don't seem relevant to their lives, churches that are boring them and don't connect with them, using words and language they don't get. They're not nearly as turned off to God as much as they are to church. And make sure you hear the next statement: they aren't nearly as turned off to Jesus Christ as they are to Christians. Christians who do not reflect the heart of the Father well at all. When we start to get it right, please know they will come. But know something else. While you can expect some to come, expect some to leave. Very sincerely. When you begin to live out a missional life, when the church stays on track with mission, expect some to come in, but also expect some of the saints, they won't get it and they'll leave. In grace, when that happens, in grace, release them and let them go. I've said this for years and years in the membership classes. Some of you have taken it will remember hearing me say this, but if not, I'll say it here publicly yet again. If you refuse to live a missional life, if you for whatever reason, you're just not going to get into living a missional life like Jesus, of having the Father's heart for people outside of the church, then Essex Alliance Church, sooner or later, will not be comfortable for you, and this will not be the place where you'll say, this can be home. Because you see, it's living the missional life piece for the cause of Christ that makes everything else make sense. And if you're not going to live a missional life, if you're not going to have relationships with people outside of the church, if you're not going to say, hey, come with me to church and experience what it means for someone to make the journey for the first time themselves, it's only a matter of time until you go, man, I'm just not getting it, and this church won't be your home. Let me tell you a story. My mother. My dad has now since passed away, but my mom and dad would come to church. They would come and they'd love to hear me preach. So they would come up and they'd visit us for the week. They'd come on a Friday, stay for Saturday. They'd stay for church on Sunday. We'd say, let's go to lunch afterwards. Nope, we're good. We'll be out of here. They never stay for very long, but they want to stay for church on Sunday because they would like to hear me preach. But if they lived here, they would never attend church here. This would not be church home for them. I know that because I attend church with them through the years when I've been with them. And man, I know where they want to be in a church, and it's not here. Our music's too loud. It's the wrong kind of music. I look like this. I mean, there's a list of things that just would not be the place. They love to hear me preach, but this would not be home. That changed for my mom one day. My dad had already passed away, and my mom was here by herself. She sat right in front of the sound booth. And there was a greeting time, and we had people stand up and greet. And I preached, and I got done. I came down here. My mom ran to the front, almost sounded panicked. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, my dad's already died, so it can't be my dad having a heart attack. She doesn't look like she's having a heart attack, but it was like, come quickly, with urgency. So she dragged me back, literally pulled me back. She wanted me to meet this young woman that she had sat next to in church. They met during the greeting time. And this young woman had said to my mom, I've never been to church, I've never been to any church before. I'm just feeling like, she said to my mom, do you attend church here? She said, no, but my son's the pastor. She said, well, I tell you what, I've never been to a church in my life, but I just feel like I got to know if there's a God or not. I don't know where to look, so I stumbled in here. So my mom was like, oh, I'm going to get my son. So the service is over. She drags me back to this poor woman, and she goes, this is so-and-so. She's never been to church before. And it's like I'm going, you know, I meet this young woman. I say, listen, pay no attention to the crazy woman. We let her come a couple times a year, you know. And then she goes, no, you understand. She's never been to any church before. I'm going, mother, stop. So I talked to this young woman, and we talked a little further. Just to speed the story up, that young woman attended church. I had the chance to lead her to Christ. Married, met a man here, a guy at church, married, and they've since moved away. But here's the point of the story. My mother talked to me every single week. And instead of a typical Florida conversation where it starts with, so how's the weather up there? She would say, so how's that woman? Well, what about her? And all of a sudden, our music wasn't too loud. She didn't care about the hymns. Because she sat next to a woman that when the music started, the woman began to cry. Now, my mom cried too. She goes, oh, make it stop. So, a lot of similarities. But she's never sat next to a woman who cried, listen, because the Holy Spirit was present. No offense to my mom. I said this to my mom. I said, Mom, what happened to you is you've been in the church for 50 plus years and you've never sat next to someone who's been an unbeliever. You've never walked with someone who's unchurched. And all of a sudden her eyes were open and church looked different to her. Some will leave. And a side story for that, unfortunately, when some leave, not only will they leave, but some will be nasty, just so you know. When some leave, they turn nasty. Because what happens is they leave and they'll get kind of worked up about things that aren't quite the way that they want it because we like church the way that it is for us and the way it should be for us. And we kind of like, I say this through the years, when change comes, we all like church the way it was when we found it. So some folks would leave. We went through a period of time where we had some church people leave, and we were being accused locally of that we weren't preaching the gospel, we weren't believing in the Bible, we were teaching heresy, because some of the things we were committed to is we said this. We said, you know, the church wasn't called to be a political action committee. The church wasn't called to make sure the 10 Commandments are put in all the public places. The church wasn't called to be a Christian watchdog group. The church was called to live out the model of Christ with the Father's heart. And so that's what we did. So we had people that were upset. So we got picketed one Sunday. Some of you will know the story in the history, but many of you won't. We were actually picketed one Sunday morning, Easter Sunday morning. Not picketed by some anti-church group, picketed by local Christians. Easter Sunday morning, I came early, and they were already out front, right out here, snowy, rainy day, and they were a group of them walking up and down the side of the road with signs that said, welcome to Camp Ichabod. If you don't know the word Ichabod, it's a biblical name that means the glory of the Lord departed. So welcome to Camp Ichabod. Welcome to the place where God does not reside. These were Christians. Some of them had been in our church and had left angry. So we said, I got a quick staff meeting together in our little glass block office, got them all together and said, okay, what are we going to do? We sat there and talked. They said, you know what? Regardless of the day and regardless of the signs and the people, we're going to love them. So someone's going to take them coffee. So we did the biblical thing. We cast lots. Yeah, we talked. Oh, you lose, you're out, you know. So one guy lost. He said, I'm the guy. He took coffee. He got a tray full of coffee, took it out with him, and a miserable day, and said, walked up to the first person and said, listen, we know you don't like us. We know you think we're wrong. We get that, but we still care about you. We thought you could have some hot coffee. The guy took the cup, took the lip off, and said we wouldn't drink this vile drink from your hands, and poured it out. Christians. But listen to me. When you are willing to live your life on mission for the cause of Christ with the Father's heart, you can trust Him. That day got done. A single mom waited at the end to meet me. Single mom came with 3 kids. She said, I just want to say to you, thank you. I've never been to church before the first time. I just want to say thank you, and I want to say your children's workers were incredible. And I said, well, thank you. And she said, no, even on this miserable day, to think that I drove up and your children's workers were out front holding signs welcoming our kids to Camp Ichabod. I said, yeah, there's something else. Those people with the signs are something else. She thought that was the name of our children's program, Camp Ichabod. Listen, I mean this. Some will leave, release them. Some will be angry, release them. And live on mission for the cause of Christ. And the reason you do that is for the third reason, which I close, is that when you live on mission with the heart of Jesus, the church will grow, but more importantly, the Father will be pleased. Because you look and you talk and you live like Him. Friends, that's what I call us to. That's who we are. That's who we hope to continue to become. Loving people for Christ. Stand, please. Let me pray. Lord Jesus, may this truth sink in. For when we live on mission with a Father's heart, all the other pieces come into play. But if we're not going to live on mission, sooner or later, nothing else links together. When I pray for the church to live on mission, of course, I'm praying for me. Keep my heart soft like yours. I thank you for that moment years ago where in that panic moment, I got to look at your heart. May we have and keep the Father's heart in front of us. All for Christ. Amen. God bless you.